$1 investment in infrastructure from the Morrison and Berejiklian governments, and I've got to say Hawkesbury people are very excited to find a solution here that gets them off the roads and back to the dinner tables in time at night. So I might, Councillor Sarah Richards, would you like to come forward?
Thank you, Robin. And yes, I'm Sarah Richards, a councillor on Hawkesbury City Council, and in fact a local who lives just a few streets that way. So very invested in this project and thankful that both governments, state and federal, have come together to deliver this funding for our local community. It is my pleasure today to introduce to you the Prime Minister of Australia, Scott Morrison, the Premier of New South Wales, Gladys Berejiklian, Marise Payne, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Paul Fletcher, the Minister for Urban Infrastructure, and Andrew Constance, the Minister for Transport and Roads. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sarah. It's great to be here with so many colleagues here today for a very important infrastructure project for Western Sydney. This is part of a $110 billion investment that we're making right across the country. Over the course of the last 18 months, as the Premier knows all too well, we have had many challenges to face. Those challenges, of course, have been in confronting COVID, but it has also been in confronting the economic challenges that have flowed from the COVID pandemic. But a mainstay of our economic effort has been continue to invest in important infrastructure all around the country. That is why today Australia's economy is bigger today than it was before the pandemic started. It is why there are more Australians employed today than before the pandemic started. It wasn't just because of the significant financial support provided through JobKeeper and JobSeeker, cash flow boosts and these many projects, but also because we've maintained the pace and in fact accelerated the pace of going forward with major infrastructure works all around the country. Now, it was a few years ago that we stood here as we announced that we'd be committing to this project. And we said there'd be more work to do as we would consult with the community and find the best way to ensure that we had this crossing and the various other supporting infrastructure works in a position to go forward. That work's been done. There's a bit more to do. But what we're here to announce together with the New South Wales Government is today that this will be a $500 million project. $400 million of that funded by the Commonwealth Government and the balance 20% funded by the state government. Today, we're amping up again some $200 million into this project to ensure that this can go ahead. This means getting people home sooner and safer. It means getting to the job site sooner and safer. It means ensuring that the village communities of this part of Western Sydney are preserved and maintained. There is still work to be done to continue to consult and work with the local community. I want to thank the local government, I want to thank the community groups and everyone who's worked so closely with this consultation process to ensure we've been able to get to where we are today. And we need to keep going down that path to ensure we can have this important project in place for Western Sydney. Now, this is how you retain your AAA credit rating. This is how you retain a strong and vibrant economy in the middle of a global pandemic which is raging around the world. This is how Australia continues to go forward and Western Sydney continues to go forward by ensuring that we keep up to the pace with projects and the infrastructure needs that are so urgent and always have been here in the growing regions of Australia and none less so here in Western Sydney. So I want to thank Premier Berejiklian for her great support on this project. We work together on so many projects and this is just another of them, whether it's out in Western Sydney Airport and the road and rail infrastructure that supports that massive investment here in Western Sydney, or indeed this one here that we announced today. And with that, I'll pass you on to the Premier.
Thank you. Thank you, Prime Minister. Can I firstly thank you and the generosity you've shown in supporting 80% funding of this project and the states kicking in the 20%, which is often the case. But the federal government again has demonstrated their vision for making sure that infrastructure in New South Wales is achieved. And one thing I'm incredibly proud of is even though we have had our huge challenges in the last 18 months in New South Wales, there hasn't been a single day where we've had to down tools on our infrastructure pipeline. We've made sure we've kept construction sites open. We've made sure that our infrastructure pipeline has been followed through with, and so the people of New South Wales can be assured that when the PM and I announce a project's being delivered in New South Wales, it will actually happen, and we're looking forward to getting on with the job and looking forward to providing relief to the community of the Hawkesbury, a community that's been very patient, that's had to go through its own challenges of late, but now can be confident in the knowledge that we care about how much time they sit in traffic. We want them to spend more time with their families or at work or doing whatever else they want to do, and I'm looking forward to getting cracking on with the project. I want to thank everybody who's been involved, obviously the federal government for their financial contribution, but also the planners at both state and federal level that have made sure this project is coming to life.
Thank you, Prime Minister and Premier. It's great to be here at this very significant announcement of $500 million in funding for this crossing of the Hawkesbury River. As the Prime Minister and the Premier mentioned, when the project was first announced, there was a $250 million commitment, but then a lot of consultation done on how this project could best meet the needs of both people travelling across the Hawkesbury River, but also the communities of Richmond and North Richmond. And what that has ended up with, following that extensive consultation, extensive design work, is a much more extended solution which bypasses the town centres of both communities. So that's a better outcome for people who live in those communities, these significant historic communities. Also a better outcome for those travelling on this route. Well, there'll be time savings of some 12 minutes. Multiplied by the 31,000 vehicles that are using this, that's a very, very significant aggregate time saving. Now, the Morrison and Berejiklian governments working together very closely on this project, as we are on so many projects across Western Sydney. Western Sydney Airport, Western Sydney Infrastructure Plan, and so much more. And certainly I work very closely with New South Wales Transport Minister Constance on the details of many of these projects. And so I'll pass now to Andrew to tell us a bit more about the project. Andrew.
Well, good morning everybody, and to the Prime Minister and Premier, thank you for also backing in what is a wonderful project for the Hawkesbury. I know certainly in terms of the advocacy of both Robin and Sarah, it's second to none. This is about returning the villages to the villages and getting the through traffic out of those villages. If you think about 31,000 cars and the choke point that exists currently on the road network, it's about providing that third river crossing. It's about speeding up the through traffic, and as I said, getting village life back to local residents. This is an 11-kilometre bypass. It's one which will have a third river crossing of around 250-metre bridge. 6 intersection upgrades, and of course also improvements to the existing road network. It also doubles the flood resilience as well, which is also critically important, and is the major connection point between the Bells line of road and of course the Sydney Basin. The project itself will start in terms of major works next year. There is still some degree of consultation which is happening over the next month, which is really important for locals. And then of course at the same time completing the reference design work and getting on with the works next year. Certainly in terms of jobs, this is an infrastructure-led recovery when it comes to the pandemic, and New South Wales with its in excess of $100 billion over the next 4 years, $72 billion into transport and roads, is generating some 150,000 jobs in transport and roads alone in projects like this. This one, 850 jobs. That'll be jobs in Western Sydney, jobs for young people in particular, in some cases apprentices and trainees who will be working for the first time on a major project like this. So it's very exciting for all concerned, and I know from the locals' perspective it's one which will just ease that enormous traffic burden that exists currently.
Thank you. Thank you. We're happy to take some questions on, let's talk about the project first. If there are other matters that people wish to raise, then I'm sure the Premier and I don't mind responding to those as well.
Did the flood crisis severely this year maybe bring this project forward? Was that part of the thinking?
No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, this project has been on a consultation path for some time now, and it's been a very exhaustive consultation process. Many options have been identified and talked through, and I have no doubt there are still some fine points still to be worked through. But that said, I mean, doubling the scale of this project in terms of the investment from the Commonwealth and the state, I think has indicated our willingness to understand what the challenges are, what the community is looking for, and make sure that we can design a project as best as you possibly can to ensure that it's meeting the needs of the community, providing jobs, supporting the lifestyle, which is very important in Western Sydney, in these areas, and to ensure that at the end of the day it's helping Western Sydney be even stronger than it is today. Well, I understand. I'll ask. I mean, Andrew, you're probably best placed to deal with that. But as I say, we'll keep trying to resolve every issue we can. But it's a very important project for Western Sydney that we're keen to get going.
Alex, certainly I'm going to meet with some of those residents afterwards. But the key point and the reason we're here is about that river crossing and this point that we are now going to see another river crossing. There is no doubt with the through traffic, it is a major choke point here. And as I said before, we want to return village life to the Richmonds and North Richmonds in terms of those communities, which is what this is about. So that bridge just there is an example of the choke point that exists currently with those 31,000 cars, and that's why we're standing here.
We saw during the floods that the Windsor Bridge had been dubbed flood-proof, and we saw will this be flood-proof?
Well, I think it's fair to say, I mean, ultimately it's not just about the bridge crossings and what have you. The entire road network is subject to floods, and in particular the floods that we saw recently, major floods. So the beauty with this bridge is it's going to be 6 metres higher than the existing crossing, and ultimately when you have major flood events, everything gets disrupted. But in terms of this bridge, it is higher, but we've also got the existing challenge in terms of the entire road network. And that is why we have in place very comprehensive strategies around dealing with the flood-prone nature of the road network in the Hawkesbury, and making sure when we do see major events that we're able to see that infrastructure be resilient and be open as quickly as possible after those major events. So in total there's going to be 21. We have a combination of partial acquisitions and full acquisitions, but I'm going to talk to some of those residents after this, and some of those commercial property owners.
They're pretty upset. There are some homeowners here that are finding out through this press conference.
Yeah. So one of the challenges is when we make major infrastructure investments like this, we have to do it in a timely and concurrent way, because we have seen, and we don't want to see gaming, particularly amongst developers across the city with such a large infrastructure program. If I had a way in which we weren't able to disrupt people's lives to build major infrastructure for everybody, I'd love to do it. I know that certainly in terms of the impact for those residents, I'm really sorry that this acquisition process has to happen. But one of the things that we want to do is firstly make sure that we support them with the appropriate property manager, we handle it sensitively, and where possible, particularly through reference design, if there is some slight changes we can make, we'll work through that. But I'll meet with the residents afterwards.
Just to clarify, I know this is years ago, there's no toll.
No, there's no toll. It's like the other motorways we're building at the moment in Gateway and M12. There's no toll on this road either.
The story today, the Herald, in regards to Transurban, is a move towards distance-based tolling across the board, potentially. Well,
I'd say this. I mean, first of all, Transurban's, like anybody else, can bring an unsolicited proposal to government. I mean, this is a response to a parliamentary inquiry. But I just say this in relation to Mr. Mears. He belongs to a party which has delivered more toll roads than any other in the state's history, including the longest tolling concession of 48 years and also the highest toll. So, I mean, unlike Labor, this government has put in place a regime to support motorists with tolling concession benefits, and at the same time 70 cost of living measures as well. So ultimately, unlike Labor, when he was a staffer in that government, they tunnel funnelled on the Cross City Tunnel. They tunnel funnelled with the Lane Cove Tunnel. So he hasn't got a particularly good track record. And I'd ask everyone to look at the history of the former government in relation to tolls before taking a lecture from Mr. Mears.
Minister, you talked about how the ranking consulting with locals and the like. What are those consultations?
Well, again, I mean, this is part of the process, so I'll have a chat to them afterwards. The community has to July to continue to input into the project, and that's important. What we did first up was go out with 4 route options for the community to consider, and part of this is, and again, the key challenge is we do want to try and mitigate against property take wherever we can, because I know it's disruptive, and ultimately I'm sorry that we have to go through this. So I'll talk to those residents afterwards.
Do you think it's fair though
Well, the point out of it is that we do this concurrently because there's a principle here. You know, we ultimately have to make the announcement jointly because unfortunately across this city we don't want to be giving particularly developers the upper hand in terms of land banking where we might actually build infrastructure. That's why we do it concurrently like this. And I know it's hard, but ultimately we have staff who go out and knock on doors and start to talk to people about the process. I'm going to talk to you afterwards. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, let me talk to you afterwards and we'll let the journos ask the questions and I'll talk to you afterwards. Sorry? Yeah, that's okay. Okay, well let me talk to you about that afterwards. Okay. Yeah. I understand that issue. Okay, let me have a chat to you afterwards. But I mean, everyone, as I said, ultimately with investments like this, everyone is seeking to A, return village life to the locals, B, deal with the through traffic. So I will have a chat to you about your concerns afterwards.
Last few questions, please. Premier, on the vaccine, you made your fitness clear this morning in regards to Victoria's extra dose with the Prime Minister here. Are you able to talk about the allocation then?
Sure. I mean, look, the PM has to worry about the entire nation. I've just got to worry about New South Wales. And I've just been public about this from day dot, and the PM knows. We just want to make sure that New South Wales continues to get our fair share. I mean, we've been through outbreaks. There's going to be more outbreaks. We're in a pandemic. And look, I appreciate the pain and angst that our Victorian citizens are going through, and our thoughts are with them during this very difficult time. And I appreciate that other states will potentially go through this at different times during the pandemic. We have to be open to that. But at the same time, I think as the Premier of New South Wales, the PM would expect me to say New South Wales should get its fair share during the course of the pandemic. I mean, the Avalon cluster, we had over 170 cases, 30 in one day. We've been through rough times in New South Wales, and I just say, you know, we're trying to do the heavy lifting with bringing back 3,000 Aussies home every single week. We haven't stopped. We keep bringing Aussies home, 3,000 Aussies home every single week, and I can't tell you the stress that puts on our system to keep everyone safe. So I think the PM would be disappointed if I didn't speak up on behalf of my state. I'm simply saying New South Wales has done the heavy lifting. We'll continue to do that. 45% of people we process through our state quarantine system are actually citizens of other states. We do that because we're Australian as well as New South Wales citizens. And all I'm arguing, which the PM would expect me to do, is say that New South Wales, during the course of the pandemic in relation to vaccines, doesn't matter which one it is, should get its fair share.
Prime Minister, is it fair that Victorians are now getting this advantage with the extra dose?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, none of the additional doses that are going to Victoria are coming at the expense of any other state. That's the first point. New South Wales is receiving over 80,000 doses of Pfizer a week this month. That'll go to over 100,000 next month. There's an additional 50,000 doses that are going into the GPRC system, and that's as a result of discussions we've had with the Health Minister here in New South Wales. So there's additional 50,000 coming in this month, also to New South Wales, into the GP system. And I think that's a positive. And what is also very good news is that on the weekend we just went past the 5 million mark in terms of the number of people vaccinated in a first dose. That's 1 in 5 Australians. You know, it took us over 45 days to get to that first million. It took us 10 days to get to that last million to get us to 5 million. So the time taken, each mark is getting shorter and shorter, and that's as the rollout continues to gather pace. Now we're over 800,000 in a week, and that will continue. And I concur with the Premier. I mean, New South Wales has done the heavy lifting when it comes to bringing people back from overseas. around 3,000 people a week, and on occasion more than that when there have been special circumstances, such as when we were dealing with repatriating citizens from Lebanon during the terrible explosion last year, and New South Wales was the first to provide that support. So we appreciate that, and so, you know, we are continuing to provide those doses and providing further information on the program going out over the next 10 weeks. That should happen in the next few days. As I said, additional 50,000 going into New South Wales for the GP system. More than 400,000 will come in this week at over 80,000 a week. And next month that will go up to over 100,000 a week. And the key factor then is for people to come and take those doses.
Prime Minister, considering that we're in Richmond at the moment, would you consider a dedicated quarantine facility at the Richmond RAF base, considering that it kind of fits the criteria, plenty of land, federally owned, 30 minutes from the hospital? Is that something that you consider?
Well, first of all, I'm sure the Premier will concur with me, New South Wales is neither asking for an additional quarantine facility here in New South Wales, and nor are we seeking one. 3,000 people are coming through every single week here in New South Wales, and that is being done at an incredibly high success rate. So there is no difference in our view. We're neither seeking one, nor is New South Wales seeking one. I mean, if borders were in a position of opening in a year's time or so, well, that is a different situation. But if we're in a position to open borders, then the requirement for quarantine will be very, very different to what it is today. And I think that's a very speculative position at this present time. There is also the key requirement in that criteria that we tabled on Friday, that it doesn't impact on other Commonwealth activity. Now, it's a RAF base, and it needs to operate as a RAF base. It's not a medical facility, it's a RAF base, and its first job is national defence and the work that it does to support emergency support and other operations that impact not just here out in Western Sydney, but more broadly across the state. So there are no requests for additional quarantine facilities here in New South Wales. New South Wales has been doing the heavy lifting without complaint for many, many months, indeed over a year. And from a national point of view, we're very, very appreciative of that role that they've played.
Yes, certainly. The point I was making yesterday is not only are we bringing in 3,000 Australian citizens home every week, but currently in our hotel quarantine system we have over 5,000 residents. 5,000 Australians in hotel quarantine at the moment. The point I was making is we are at our operational capacity. We have no capacity to do more. So if there was any proposal in the future, it wouldn't come from us, because we're at stretch point now. So the health and police have told me the expert advice is New South Wales, once you get over the 5,000, and sometimes we creep up to 5,500 at any one time. Once you creep up over that, you're really at a very high risk point. We never want to get to that. That's why the point I made was we certainly wouldn't be putting in a request to operate any additional facility, because we don't have the capacity. We're at capacity now. We're doing our bit. But however, as the PM said, down the track, quarantine could look different once the majority of our population's vaccinated and our international borders are open. Well, then that's a different question. But at this point in time, we don't have capacity to operate anything more than what we're doing. That's the point I was making. You'd have to build, to equate to what New South Wales is doing, you'd have to build 10 such facilities in New South Wales. So whilst no system of quarantine, I believe, is perfect, it doesn't matter where it is, it doesn't matter what it looks like, who builds it and who operates it. It is a risky proposition, and we do it knowing that every day, but it's the right thing to do.
But yeah, Victoria.
A number of backbenchers and some ministers have very serious concerns about the cemeteries reform. How committed are you to delivering it as announced, and will you consider changes to the
Oh, look, we're always looking at every policy position on every matter, and I'll continue to consult with colleagues on that.
Prime Minister, just on Victoria, the striking numbers again today. Do you think the lockdown should be extended past later this week?
Well, that'll ultimately be a decision for the Victorian government, as it always is. The Commonwealth will determine its position through the Chief Medical Officer. I mean, we are seeing the cases that are being identified are occurring predominantly in quarantine, and whether they're presenting in other areas, they're in a contained situation. So, I mean, but let me just sort of give you some context. Every day in the UK at the moment, there's 4,393 cases. Now, that is in a country that has a 75.8% vaccination on first dose. 4,393 cases. In Canada, there are over 2,000 cases every single day. They have a vaccination rate of 67% on first doses. In Taiwan, we're seeing over 450 cases a day. In Korea, we're seeing over 600. In Japan, over 1,700. Here in Australia, we are living in a way with this virus like few, if any, other countries other than New Zealand are in the world. And this is a challenge in Victoria, but is one that will be overcome. And it will be one that I will hopefully see Victoria opened again soon. And particularly for those parents who are having to keep their kids at home away from school. Kids have lost enough time out of school over the course of the last 18 months. And it's very important we get those kids back to school as soon as possible. So I am hopeful that these restrictions in Victoria will be lifted as soon as possible. As the Premier herself said, when similar circumstances were faced here in New South Wales, the restrictions were contained to a very specific part of Sydney. And so I would be urging that we move towards lifting those restrictions as soon as possible. We'll be in a position tomorrow for Victorians affected in Melbourne to be able to go online and make those applications for the payments, I'm advised, and there'll be further updates provided by the Minister for Services Australia later today to confirm those arrangements.
Prime Minister, Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk had her injection of the Pfizer vaccine for over 50 because she said she wants it in case she goes to the Tokyo Olympics. You had plans to previously go to the Olympics. Are you going to go to the Tokyo Olympics?
No, I have no plans to go to those Olympics. I wish I'll be looking forward to seeing Yoshi Suga, the Prime Minister, next weekend. This weekend coming, I should say, at the G7 plus meetings, which will be incredibly important for Australia, incredibly important to sit down with the leaders of the greatest liberal and largest liberal democracies in the world and some of the largest economies in the world. They have a big impact on where the world's heading, and so I'm looking forward to those meetings, including with my very good friend Prime Minister Suga, and we wish them all the best with the hosting of those Olympics. Could you imagine having gone through all the preparations for hosting an Olympic Games and then having the world struck by a pandemic? That I know was quite heartbreaking for the people of Japan, and so we wish them all the best as they persevere and put these games on. I think that shows tremendous resilience and strength on their part, and I'll be encouraging the Prime Minister, but there are many other issues we'll be discussing as well while I'm there. Okay.
Thanks everyone. Last one, please.
These are incredibly important meetings for Australia's national interest. And these matters are being well managed here in Australia, and I'll be in constant contact with the situation, whether in the Victoria or anywhere else. But when you're sitting down with the President of the United States, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, the President of France, the Prime Minister of Japan, our biggest allies and partners around the world, and to have been invited to do so. Australia is not a member of the G7. This is the third year in a row that I've been invited to participate alongside my global colleagues to focus on the biggest challenges the world faces: COVID and the pandemic, the recession that it has caused, the challenges around climate change. All of this will be key factors in the discussions that we have, and most importantly, global security and regional security here in the Indo-Pacific. These are important responsibilities of the federal government, the Australian government, and so I'm looking forward to the opportunity to discussing and progressing these very important matters with our global colleagues over the course of the next week. Thank you very much.
Thanks everybody. Thank you.
See you again, mate. Yeah, we'll get outside.
Well, I'm good. I reckon that's yours.
Thanks for the flag, Tim.
That's all right, mate. I wish I could find the arm for it.
Oh, that was fine.
Yeah, that's definitely your one. Yep. None of us have that brand.